Every day in our business it is battle royale, for instance in the contact centre, to engage with members. So we need government to continue to help us to make superannuation easy.
One of our top priorities is to significantly simplify and standardise documents, not just around superannuation, I'd have to say, around financial services in general, because the bottom line is if documents are unreadable to consumers that are meant to inform them and then protect them, they can't read them, they're of little use, and they then involve significant cost on administration and compliance. And I think we can make substantial progress, and that's a top priority for us.
Government should never do for us what we can do for ourselves. I think the most important thing is to say we can imagine that we're going to get old and not work. We should, through our life, invest in a super policy that carries us through our days when we're in need. We should take responsibility for that.
We need to find the right balance in Australia to allow many Australians access to advice, be it limited advice on a low-cost basis, and to do that we do need to allow an environment of disclosures that is, instead of 80 pages long, it might be 5 pages long and in plain English. And we need to work as hard as we possibly can between the industry and government and the regulators to make it really easy for Australians to be able to get access to advice and information that's really easy to read.
This government, the new government, I think will look very much to the idea of helping those on lower incomes and low middle incomes, all the casuals and all the part-time workers, and that will be the challenge for them, and that challenge can only be met if they integrate the age pension with the superannuation that people have.
What worries me is with the superannuation things, the way the last government set them up, whether this government can change them, sort of.
As an incentive, when a child is born, you've got a superannuation account, some sort of baby bonus.
I'd like to see them really build Australians' confidence in super.
Well, I'd like to see that the benefits of this scheme are going to be preserved.
From the new government, I expect firstly that they'll introduce or help increase the SG rate, so from 9 to say 15.
Maybe they could lift the super guarantee up to maybe 15%.
I'd like them to change the level of compulsory superannuation, the guarantee, from 9% to in increments to up to 15%.
I expect the government to be consistent. Consistency is something that I really put emphasis on.
I suppose what I'd really like to see is the government ensure that all Australians have access to adequate superannuation.
I'd really like to see some regulatory change regarding financial planning.
I want Australia to have higher paid teachers, much less reliance on fossil fuels, a government that represents Australia as a whole.
I think it's very important to have an education program, just hopefully, if possible, teaching financial literacy in schools.
So I'd love to see happen is some focus on how we deal with some of the issues for women. Women typically are still on average earning less, still on average saving less, and have career breaks that have lots of implications in relation to superannuation.
PDS is really nothing more than a glorified and extremely lengthy version of a dry clean only label on some item of clothing we buy. We know with the dry clean only label that they're just covering their bases. And we know with the PDS that it's a lot of information none of us ever bother to read, that we skim through really quickly, and then someone one day down the track is going to say, you shouldn't have washed that.
We'll only have 3 expectations, and that's keep it simple, keep it simple, and keep it simple.
The wish list for the new government revolves around a system acknowledged as sound, but needing attention in terms of adequacy across the board, particularly for women. Simplicity in communication and documentation, certainty in the process and the structure, and a resistance for tinkering's sake. The message is loud, so leave the overall structure alone. Get the super train up to speed, back on track, and heading in the right direction. The new government has a clean sheet of paper, a well-publicised desire to restore super's development, and a receptive citizenship. So the time is right.
Good morning. It's great to see you all here red-eyed and bushy-tailed. It's my great pleasure to introduce the Honourable Nick Sherry, Minister for Superannuation and Corporate Law, Senator for Tasmania in the Rudd Labor government. Hasn't that got a nice lovely ring to it? He's responsible for all superannuation policy and administration matters, including taxation and prudential supervision of superannuation funds. His corporate law responsibilities include governance and solvency issues, as well as aspects of financial market conduct, disclosure, investor protection, and supervision and oversight of the Australian Securities and Investments Commission. And I guess you'd have to agree there's not a lot going on in that jurisdiction right now. Other areas which he covers includes financial literacy and the Royal Australian Mint. Nick was previously Shadow Minister responsible for superannuation and has also been a Shadow Assistant Treasurer. He was also a Parliamentary Secretary during the Keating Labor government. He's chaired the Senate Select Committee on Superannuation in the former Labor government and was Deputy Chair of that committee when it also covered financial services at a later date. He's had more than 20 years' experience in the Australian superannuation system, and that's given him a deep knowledge and interest in the design and operation of superannuation and pension systems. He's kept abreast of the international pension scheme, studying closely the systems and developments in the UK, the US and Switzerland, and he's written extensively on the subject. But I think undoubtedly his period as a foundation trustee of Host Plus is the most valuable experience he's had in his current role. He's been a Senator for Tasmania since 1990 and he's based in Devonport on the north-west coast. Would you welcome the Minister for Superannuation and Corporate Law, Nick Sherry.
Thanks, Sandy, for the introduction. Good morning to you all. I was at the dinner last night, so I hope you're all fresh and enjoyed the entertainment of last night. One thing I'm not going to be, I was a little bit taken aback. Michael was very focused politically. Not even I am going to upset as many people as he did last night. One thing he did indicate, he quoted a reference to John Howard and it's time to go. I think in the context of superannuation, it's time to restart, and I'll talk a bit more about some of the issues ahead of us shortly. I must say, when I got up this morning and looked at myself in the mirror, given the comments of last night, I thought, gosh, people are going to be watching my eyebrows when I give this speech. And then I went to reach for the hairdryer and I thought, crikey, I better not touch it. There'll be assault with a deadly weapon. But really it is great to be here. I was just reflecting on all those years ago, 1991, the Wollongong conference which I was at, and how far the Conference of Major Superannuation Funds has come since that Wollongong event of 1991. And as Sandy mentioned, there'd be some people in the audience who share with me the exciting times of the initial introduction of the 3% compulsory awards superannuation and all of the developments that occurred at that time. It's now 20 years on and look where we all are. The one thing I would just like to touch on briefly is, of course, I've been the Minister now for just on 3 months. It's very, very early days in a new government, but I would hope to indicate to you today some important themes and some important work that we've begun already, and give you a sense of what the longer term agenda is. I'd also like to acknowledge the important work of the Australian Institute of Trustees. For those of you who haven't attended any of their training, first-class training deliverer, I should know. They helped me get some formal qualifications in super 2 years ago. So the AIST, first-class training delivery institution, and I encourage all of you who haven't done any of their courses to do so. As Sandy mentioned, I bring together a range of responsibilities in superannuation and corporate law. By what's called administrative order, policy administration, including taxation and prudential regulation in relation to superannuation, corporate governance encompassing the administration of ASIC. So in a real sense, the Retirement Incomes Group, APRA Super, the whole of ASIC, the Government Actuary, the ATO Superannuation Administration and Tax, they all report to me in a policy sense, and the same for the public sector. The public sector superannuation arrangements are part of the Department of Finance. By administrative order, they've been allocated to me. And as Sandy touched on, I also have, I'm not sure why, but I've got responsibility for the Royal Australian Mint. Some of you may have seen a report in the papers 2 weeks ago where our coins are losing money. One of the downsides of the minerals boom is the cost of the metal content is greater than the face value. And that's yet another issue I've got on my plate. It's just interesting in politics what you end up with. I would never have dreamed I would end up with trying to determine how we reduce the losses on Australian coins. Briefly, before I get into some policy space, I did want to touch on our approach to the budget. Obviously, this is a difficult period in terms of inflation, the need for fiscal restraint. The approach to the budget will be very, very disciplined. There is a very hardline approach to new spending and a hardline approach to savings. In the current environment, and you're all aware of the issues, not just about inflation and the international financial services environment we face, but in the current inflationary environment, excessive government spending contributes to demand, and we want to reduce that demand to reduce the inflationary pressure. One way is to increase the budget surplus from 1% of gross domestic product to 1.5%. In his first economic speech, Kevin Rudd flagged a 5-point plan to fight inflation, and one of those 5 points includes options to provide real incentives to encourage private saving. In terms of labour and superannuation, I'm sure many of you are aware of our record in government. We championed the cause of superannuation. We made it compulsory, and we did so for a fundamental reason of fairness. It was unfair back in the 1980s that superannuation went to a minority of people, generally the better off, those on a higher income or in the public service, while 60% of Australians, generally low middle income, in industries such as hospitality, transport, etc., retail and the like, and a majority of women had no superannuation and therefore no additional retirement income. And that's an issue I want to stress. Labor's approach to superannuation is not superannuation to replace the age pension. Superannuation for most Australians is an add-on to the age pension. It is not to replace the age pension. And I do get concerned sometimes in the debate when I see, not necessarily from anyone in this audience, superannuation additional contributions promoted in the context of you should be putting extra super in because there'll be no age pension in 20 or 30 years' time. That is simply not the case. That is not going to happen on any projections. I've mentioned the issue of compulsion. Compulsion brings with it a duty of care to government, a very strong duty of care to government. Government has rightly compelled individuals to save for their retirement, provides significant tax concessions, estimated at around $27 billion a year, that's the tax concessions, and directs those concessional contributions of around $60 billion a year into the hand of private sector institutions governed by trustee structures. And of course the system has $1.2 trillion in assets as of December last year. What it will have after July 1 will be interesting to see, but it's a lot of money. It's a huge savings pool. And of course it's long-term savings, generally not accessible until age 65. So for this government, issues in the governance context, and I define it quite broadly, dispute resolution, compensation, safety, diversified investment and operational costs are important concerns for the government. It is absolutely vital in our system that trustees are well placed to minimise problems before they occur and minimise the need for regulators to have to embark sometimes on onerous or intrusive oversight. Prevention is the best form of cure. And the central question I bring and ask to all participants in our system is, regardless of their particular interest, it is what is in the best interest of the member that maximises their retirement income. And that's the question I bring to all policy space. Before being elected to government, we did outline a number of principles which I think are important to recount, because they are the principles that we set down when examining policy in the superannuation space. Firstly, achieving a higher retirement income delivered over time through a combination of the age pension plus superannuation. Simplicity, each fund member should be able to understand at least the general features of the system and their own fund. Safety and confidence, levels of choice and competition. And I might say in this space there's an interesting and I think a very important philosophical and practical debate. We need to very carefully balance in a system which denies individuals the choice not to participate, but also then requires them to make a range of complex choices within the system itself, and getting that balance right is very important, for example in the context of advice. Affordability, superannuation should be a cost-effective savings vehicle with operational costs kept to a minimum and improving incentives and equity. There are two practical issues that I would also add. One is increasing workforce participation, given recent levels of employment, high levels of employment and significant skill shortages. It is important to encourage Australians who wish to participate in the workforce for as long as possible. And secondly, the practical issue of what I call administrative overload. I am aware that many funds, the IT, hardware, administration, is under significant pressure. There have been significant changes, including better super and anti-money laundering, and they have added to significant administration and cost pressures on the system. It is my hope that further changes can be made to significantly simplify the system, its operation and decision-making in the medium term. In terms of specific policy that we've been focusing on in the first 3 months,